thing right now. And Spyros, I let you present yourself and your article and ideas.
Hi everyone. Thank you for having me. So this is, first of all, let me say a bit about myself. I'm a mid-tier academic. So senior lecturer stands for what in the US lingo, that will be associate professor at the University of Essex in the UK. This presentation that I'm gonna give draws a lot from a paper I recently published, but also focuses a bit more on the AI aspects and where we are with AI, right? So there are some things here that are not on the paper. My understanding has kind of moved a bit since the paper was published. So yeah, let's go. So it's a 60-minute presentation. My understanding is that it's going to be a brainstorming session. I've cited everything as thoroughly as I could in the slides, but if you think there's anything missing, just let me know. I will focus on production and consumption, right? So there's going to be very little less. I mean, there are other problems in this world, right, other than production and consumption, but I don't know enough to do that. So it will be focused quite kind of deeply on these topics. Feel free to email me any comments you might have at any point. Quite a few of the slides you'll see, and my understanding has improved through discussions with various people in this space. So, you know, the more discussions we have, the better, right? Okay, so I'll start with a quote from Aristotle, which is it's in the beginning of Capital One, Marx Capital, I think the first book, and it's also in the beginning of a lot of AI introductory books. And the quote is about instruments, right? And Aristotle kind of makes a case that humans use instruments. Some instruments are alive, i.e. they're other humans, more or less, right, or animals. Some are inanimate. And he more or less claims that the only way that we will stop having any form of slavery in this world is if we can create instruments that are not alive, right? And he gives some examples from mythology. He talks about the statues of Daedalus, tripods of Vulcan, that they moved of their own according to the assembly of gods, right? So, you know, it's the kind of view that, that slavery is going to be with us until we manage to create machines, non-conscious machines that are going to kind of take the burden of having living instruments away from us, right? And notice the word instrument, which I think plays a pivotal role in Aristotelian thinking. Now, AI, right? So AI comes in 1956. There's a workshop in Dartmouth in the States. The goal was somewhat vague, but broadly, yeah, the goal was to replicate human intelligence, right? And send a machine. Since then, the term has subsumed fields like logic, complex systems, cybernetics, robotics, machine learning, natural language processing. In fact, I think the only reason the field nowadays is not known as cybernetics is because of academic politics. Like certain people did not, I mean, certain people wanted to kind of promote a different field, doing more or less what cybernetic does, but focus more on logic, but very much the same kind of category space. I would say that cybernetics has won out the internal battle in AI, and we do less logic now and more pattern matching, if you like, right? But we still call the overall of AI, right? So given the Aristotelian quote and the field that's meant to kind of develop intelligent machines, there are kind of, let's say, 3 overarching goals one can imagine as a first group of goals. And that's, you know, once we get these intelligent machines, these robots, right, we will achieve a form of material abundance. We will have cheap housing, cheap high quality food, cheap clothes, or free clothes. And this all will be done by machines, right? So freedom from want, or freedom from need, or whatever you want to call it. Then freedom from labor, because, you know, you're going to have these big and beautiful machines, and they're going to allow you to have all this free time in your life. And you can have the life of what I would call an Aristotelian master, right? Someone that spends their day more or less philosophizing, right? And then you would have freedom from sin. And I use a quote from Terry Pratchett from a book called Carpe Jagulum, which is like a novel, right? And Pratchett defines sin as using, basically it's dehumanization. So basically it's when you treat people like things, right? Well, we wouldn't as humanity need to treat people like things anymore because we would have animate machines, right? So one of the kind of, let's say, more ambitious roots of AI has been to create those robots or those machines that would free us from labor and give us 3 freedoms, kind of. The second thing that you see playing along, it's one of divine guidance. So the idea is that we will summon a superintelligence, a disembodied superintelligence inside a very big machine, right? And that will solve all our problems. And by problems, I mean what you would find in medieval literature as alchemical dreams. That would include immortality, right? The philosopher's stones, all these kinds of problems. And as you understand, this has deeply apocalyptic religious vibes in my view, right? The proponents of this thing wouldn't exactly phrase it the way I do. They would phrase it as artificial general intelligence or something along these lines. But I think that's what they're after. They're after a disembodied intelligence that wouldn't have anything else to do but to kind of help us grow, in a sense, right? And achieve our own kind of ambitions. Again, coming back to novels, there's a series of novels by Ian Banks called the Culture series that captures this trope, right? Really, really well. Now, I've kind of started with this thing, right? Which is like the overarching visions, right? But I want to ground it a bit more to what's happening in reality. Now, the more practical visions come from various policy documents. And I'm giving as an example a policy document from 2019, which is about the National Health Service in England, right? And that's the vision for a paramedic, right? And the idea is that she's a senior paramedic, Salma, she's 48, she's frustrated by the lack of information, she has all these kind of IT problems. She now trains, she's very happy to train herself and on the use of new digital tools, which could improve healthcare. Things don't quite work out for her, but she's still kind of trying, right? And the kind of vision moves on to 2029, where Salma is now kind of more or less fully cybernetically integrated within the National Health Service. She will be driven using an autonomous ambulance that will find the most, the best emergency route to take her. She will receive patient details almost on the spot. Smartwatches, smartphones, EEG signals, you name it, right? I mean, Salma is almost cyborg, almost linked to the organization, and there's a lot of automation coming on, right? So I'll start by kind of destroying this vision and saying that there is no way that we'll have anything like that anytime soon, right? Self-driving cars have been promised continuously since 2010. So one of Salma's kind of basic kind of, like if you look here, there was to be a self-driving ambulance, right? Well, there are no self-driving ambulances. There are no self-driving cars. Companies are shutting down their self-driving platforms left and right. There was a lot of money being pumped in. Self-driving cars will be with us within, the story has within the next 3, 4, 5 years. Now, some of the consultancies are saying 2035. It's doubtful, in my view, that we will have them in 2035 either. So, we have these visions, but they're not materializing. So the automated kind of helpers in our everyday life are not materializing, but neither is automated advice. So if you remember the first 2 goals that I mentioned, the goal of automating, dealing with everyday reality, or dealing with the material, and the goal of dealing with the abstract. So the goal of dealing with the abstract, we have IBM selling Watson. So IBM tried for years to create a massive, and they did it partially, right, to create a lot of infrastructure to help with medical decisions. But they stumbled on all kinds of problems, and they sold the unit that was responsible for this. So if you look at where we started, now we cannot even have like simple advice, right? And we cannot even have like drivers, like very simple tasks. And it's not just cars, right? We have a closure and we have like demise, I think, in a lot of sectors on the automation front. So Adidas closed down their lights out factories. They had this idea that they're going to automate shoe production. It's not there. I think there's another business that's starting a lights out factory, but no, it's agriculture. Still done by hand, right? Clothing, our clothes are still stitched together in the global south, right? There are no machines to them. Healthcare, no robotic radiographers. Though a number of years ago, there was discussion about banning, that we shouldn't train any doctor radiographers anymore because apparently machines would do it. Nowhere close. Warehouses. Amazon is still using humans to pack and deliver, right? Now, there are some tech demos, but they're mostly tech demos, right? There's nothing that's actually kind of promising. So living instruments are still very much in use. So we're still much in a condition of sin as a civilization, but we try to hide them away, right? What is success? What is success with AI? I mean, success is mostly practical statistics, right? So the automated ordering of new pots in manufacturing, when to harvest crops in agriculture, designing shoes, like very debatable if it adds any value, but there we are. Some analyzing of health records and coordinating workers, right? So this kind of magnificent new world, it's not coming, or it's not there, maybe at least. We also have search in normal computing. So there was a very famous paper published in 1945 called "As We May Think" by Vannevar Bush. I think the ideas of the paper, the ideas of agglomerating all forms of information within a machine, have largely been achieved. Right? We now can search through terabytes of data really, really fast. Like most journals are now online, they produce tons of new data and information. We are there. So we have this massive library of information that's easily queryable, which I think was the vision from 1945. This vision has been achieved. Now, why are robots so hard? Right? So I've discussed a bit about this vision, right? But it looks like we're doing particularly bad with robots, right? So the question is, why are they so hard? And there's something called Moravec's paradox, right? Which comes from Hans Moravec, a researcher, computer science researcher. Now, the thing is that abstract thought, as far as humans are concerned, is a very new trick, right? Less than 100,000 years old, right? Perceptual and motor skills have been with us since the beginning of mankind. We're exceptionally good at perceptual and motor skills, right? But abstract thought, we don't do well. And because we're so really bad in abstract thought, we get computers to do things for us that look really that look impressive, right? But really, it has to do with our capacity to do abstract thought, which is not that high. Yeah. So again, perceptual and motor skills, we're really good as humans, but abstract thought. Now, I don't think this is a better kind of example if I can capture it from Uber, right? Uber sold its self-driving cars division 2020. I think they killed the pedestrian or endangered the pedestrian. Yeah, so there was a death case. And Uber doesn't do self-driving cars anymore, but they do a lot of things with AI internally, in managing the driver fleet or in using algorithms to kind of find the best routes. So you can broadly say that we have some success in the virtual with intelligence, stuff that happens on the computer, and a lot of failure in the real, right? So this might kind of show up as being a drop. Now, okay, how far are we from total human replacement? So if we're talking about replacement of labor in any kind of meaningful way, you need machines that can create value in the Marxist sense, right? How far away we're from this? And I would define them, and the authors here do as well, as machines that can do more or less what a human does, but don't have consciousness, right? And I don't think we're anywhere close. Like, I mean, this discussion is completely science fiction or fantasy, right? There's no machine right now that has the versatility, the energy efficiency, the capacity, the out of distribution serialization, like anything that a human can do, right? We have a number of specialized machines, but we always had this, right? So that's completely out of the, yeah. So why the sudden hype, right? So in my view, the sudden hype comes because we had a number of successes, mainly, I mean, two of them in large language interfaces, right, which work reasonably well, again, in the virtual, right? A number of use cases. It's not entirely clear to me how the market is going to move in the next 5 to 10 years. There's a lot of hype, and one of it is unwarranted. But we had some success inside of the machine, and there is some success to in kind of text to images, text to virtual translation. So you type something in the computer and an image comes out, or you type something and a 5-second video comes out, and that 5-second video looks reasonable, right? Again, had you told me 10 years ago that this is the route that AI would take, basically it's TikTok videos, right? I would believe you, like you know, what's the point? But here we are, right? I mean, it seems that we're converging on creating on that attention-seeking devices, right? And kind of short videos. Now, I mean, we discussed Aristotle and the good life in the 50s, right? But and in the state of AI. So I think the previous set of slides kind of discusses what's the state of AI. But I want to, on parallel, have this discussion of what is the state of economics, right? I never thought we would focus so much on media production. There's a lot of focus on media production. However, there's this kind of vision of the good life that I would gladly subscribe to, that you would broadly call the American dream. It comes from the 50s, right? And there is this excellent book that discusses American exhibitions abroad, right? And there's this quote from the book that basically says something like that: Europeans will understand the basic necessity of separate bathrooms, running in cold water, an abundance of sunlight and electric light, air, space, green surroundings, you know, washing machines, dishwashers, vacuum cleaners, automobiles, refrigerators, right? Like a very consumerist vision of society. And the promise was, at least in the Western world, and I think also in the Soviet world, that these things would be, like, everyone would have them. There would be no question about having green surroundings, space, sun, I mean, you know, separate bathrooms. That was the promise of the 50s to the future generations, right? And it was largely, I think, the Soviet promise as well. Now, I don't think this promise is being fulfilled, right? So the promise from the 50s is, so I call this the double failed prophecy. We had this prophecy of machines coming in and guiding us, automating things, they're not coming in. All this other promise that economics would help us solve these problems. But I mean, and there are multiple kind of ways of saying the same thing. This is not happening, right? House prices are skyrocketing, the rents are way too high. I mean, you have all kinds of problems with consumption goods. I don't think this promise is being materialized at all, right? What we're getting is cheap toys, right? But an expensive necessities, right? So if you hold the current system, like, what were the promises from the 50s and what was being delivered, like on its own premises, on its own kind of ambitions, right? I don't think any of them kind of hold true. There was a historical alternative, right? And given that most of you probably know about this, but there was a historical alternative, and it failed miserably in 1991, right? And I have this quote by a book called Civil Society, which is about the failure of Eastern Europe. It doesn't include the Soviet Union, just the failure of Eastern Europe. And until 1954, there were no standard textbook. And I don't think there is a standard textbook right until now, right, on the planning economy. No one knew how to do planning. Basically, it was hearsay, word of mouth, and you talk to other bureaucrats, right? And that was the problem. But the thing is, this alternative failed in 1991. Like, we don't have the good life, right? And there's an excellent, I mean, I think a current state of affairs can be captured by this table that's in a book called European Modernity Beyond the Trajectory of European Societies. And this was shown to me by a colleague a couple of months ago, and I think it captures a current kind of where we are at the moment, right? This is an opinion poll from Eastern Germany in 1994, right? And it kind of discusses what these Germans thought of their current kind of economic conditions, how they compared against what they had previously, right? And you can see the two kind of obvious pros and cons, right? You had a commodity supply, so they claim that capitalism improved a lot the commodity supply, right? That's without question, and that the rents are too high, right? So if you look at the bottom, right, it's obvious that they were better in GDR, right? And I have with asterisk the things that the old planners managed to better, right, and the things where from, especially in the commodity space, it comes from commodities. They failed to produce commodities, right? So they weren't that bad with, I mean, they had all kinds of problems, and I think this is evident here, right? And it's evident in a lot of discussions, but commodities, they messed it up, right? And where do we go now, right? So, we have these developments in AI. We know what we know about the state of planned economies and the state of market economies. So we had enough time to kind of have discussions about them. Where are we now, right? So I think we're really stuck in a sense, right? And I guess quite a few people would feel that way. And we're really stuck because it's no longer legitimate to talk about planning, right? It's no longer a field of science that you can study independently outside of like really small academic circles. Now, non-market economies are still retreating, right? Cuba is still kind of moving towards the market direction. And in my view, that's a problem, because if we had we had the proper planning models or the proper alternative economic models, we could potentially have gone to the global south and told them, listen, these things are not working out for you. And it's obvious in the case of Cuba, for example, they're not. Here's our new solutions, right? And you could have done the same or places like Chile, right, which were far more aggressive on the implementation of alternative economic policies back in the 70s, but they won't go anywhere near anything that's on the market right now, right? So we do have a problem, right? There's really no kind of alternative that's being accepted on how to get commodities. There are various kind of small group ambitions, but these are not being followed by anyone. So again, as I kind of hinted, I think we have a double whammy: no mechanical slaves, no missile masters, no serious social movements that aim to reconfigure the world. A double failure in prophecy, in my view. We can just accept that this is what it is. There was a lot of literature in the 50s and the 60s that people actually believed this idea that all this machinery will come ahead. And you have Elal, a very well-known French anarchist, Christian anarchist, Huxley, basically more or less kind of being scared of humanity that's being lost in its pleasures, right? That you go to that hedonistic treadmill and you'll have so much fun that I don't think we're anywhere close. I think there are real problems, and the problems are not that we have too much fun. The problems are we don't have enough fun, right? So, given what we know about AI, and given the limitations of AI models that have been expressed in the last 20, 30 years, can we go and kind of start thinking about creating a new system, right? And let's kind of go down with planning, and I think it would do disservice to planet if we don't discuss Leontief for a bit, right? And Leontief was Nobel Prize winner in 1973, American economist. He did his initial models in a computer called Harvard Mark II, which is like the shape of a room. And he kind of had a paper in 1976 called National Economic Planning, Methods and Problems. He's very much to the right of most thinkers, right? He's very much a kind of, you would even call him a right-wing social democrat. But he's still very much thinking about these problems, about how can you plan the economy without, and that's a focus on what he's saying, without changing let's say, the material relations. He closes that article by saying, rich people will still be rich. So do planning, and there wouldn't be we wouldn't have any kind of bizarre reversal that you guys don't like, right? And obviously they didn't buy that. Very similar models have been used by Neurath, who was a German economist, Castoriadis, who first basically, I think, proposed the Leontief model. It's an obscure French paper that it's in French, like in one of his works that was not cited a lot. And then you have the Cox-Cottrell model, which is more, if not the same, very much close to the Leontief model, right? The central planning, why am I saying all this? Central planning was not completely delegitimized until the mid-70s. So there was still some talk back then, and there is still some discussion among circular economy and green circles. So there are some circles that discuss this, but within the mainstream, and Leontief, I consider him to be very much among the mainstream, Harvard academic, right? It's a big no-no. Now, more about planning, it was really popular right? It wasn't just cost planning in the Eastern world. It was popular. It was really popular within Europe. There was a French Ministry of Planning. They would do something called indicative planning. They wouldn't exactly plan what products to kind of produce, but they would more or less kind of how should I put it? They would put incentives or barriers or whatnot to the market and kind of push the market towards certain directions. Same with the British industry until 1978. I mean, most of the world was involved in some kind of planning. There's still some leftovers. So the European Union has now a project called Digital Product Passports, which is basically an effort to put labels on products that will help the third sector potentially to come up with better solutions as to kind of the materials that they use. So basically, you'd buy something. That's the overall idea. It's not clear yet how this is going to play out. But you would buy something, and it wouldn't just have ingredients on it. It would have other things like what else would it have? It would have where was it sourced from, the pathway. Yeah, so there's still some discussion, right? Planning was also very popular outside the European or the broader West, right? The broader Western governments. You had obviously Soviet Gosplan, which was a planning cycle. You had CyberSyn in Chile. It's not clear what's happening in non-Western countries at the moment. Planning right now, as like those technologies, let's say, that were part of CyberSyn, have now been developed to a maximum inside corporations, right? So when people go back and told me about, oh, you know, all the great things that people do with CyberSyn, CyberSyn was something great back in the 70s, but technologically, it's like a technology that's like, what, 50, 60 years behind, right? At the very least. Like if you look at any enterprise resource planning system and any corporate inventory, it captures most of what CyberSyn was doing immensely better, right? And most corporations could deploy real-time systems that predict future trends, or the components, guide production. Yeah, so quite a lot of what the governmental planners had in mind has migrated inside corporations, and I think there are a number of books that basically more or less discuss this or have this as an argument. Now, what was the Leontief model more or less trying to do, right? I'm not sure how. Let's start from the idea of a cake, right? So you have a cake here, and you have, let's say, you have a recipe for that cake, right? So you have something like, you know, you will need to make a single cake. You will need to have 225 grams of butter, 125 grams of sugar, 100 grams of soft sugar, vanilla extract, large eggs, self-raising flour, and milk, right? And given that I'll give you this recipe and I'll tell you something, well, I want you now to build me 5,000 cakes, right? Obviously, you will multiply the quantities that are in one cake with times 5,000. You would add labor or any other resources you think you'd need. But the quantities that you need to kind of build that cake include other quantities in them. So you would also need recipes for butter, for sugar, and these are generally called intermediate products. So you imagine that you collect all this information about how to make everything, more or less, right? So that was the kind of Leontief vision, or Cockshot vision, or how do you create a lot of products or useful products, right? And you put them all together in a large computer, right? And you have some targets. We're going to be making 3,000 cakes, right? And you let the computer calculate those quantities. This is called in natura because it doesn't involve money. So you do the calculation using quantities of material, right? And this is more or less what, I mean, I wouldn't say what Gosplan was trying to do, but what a lot of these models have in their mind, right? And I think that's what was behind the Gosplan model. Now, the first thing I'm going to make kind of a sharp distinction is that AI planning is somewhat different than economic planning. So economic plan is more or less trying to find out those quantities by doing a simulation. You can kind of call it a simulation of future events, but there's no decision making involved, right? So you go, if I need 5,000 cakes, this is this is where my system will equilibrate. This is how much butter I need to make. And this is how much labor I need and everything. Now, economic planning, AI planning is more or less making a conscious decision about how you make cakes, right? And chess is a really good example. So in computer chess, how do computers play chess, right? Which is like a very kind of, you probably already heard of it. So computers play chess by doing millions and millions of simulations, right? So you have a chessboard inside the computer's mind. It captures the state of the game, and it does millions and millions of future simulations, right? And by doing all these millions of future simulations, and it adds some kind of intelligence, smartness in there, right? It's able to see all the potential futures. And by being able to see all the potential futures, it backpropagates and finds out what is the best move, right? And if, I mean, you as a human, you could more or less do the same with an end game in chess. You only have 3 moves left, and you could possibly enumerate all these moves one way or another, right? If you want to do the analogy between AI planning and economic planning, the analogy should be that in AI planning, we care a lot about what is the optimal cake and how to build it. In economic planning, the way at least these models kind of think about planning, we care a lot about how the world is going to look like if given the material production process that I have right now. So we do not make any decisions. That's a massive difference. So that's the first kind of battle, if you like, between AI planning and economic planning, that these are, though they use very, very similar names, they kind of operate under different assumptions. So if you want to compare those two, AI planning is more or less equivalent to looking what is the best process to build a cake. It's much closer to corporate R&D, right? So if you want to use AI lingo and you want to transfer it to economic planning, the first thing you need to know, the first thing I've noticed at least, is that when people in AI talk about planning, if you want to transfer the analogy, in economics, that would be corporate R&D, deciding how to build a product, deciding if a product is worth building, right? Now, modern planning systems plan on every tick. So a computer plans continuously, right? It doesn't plan once at the start of the game and then stop. It plans at every tick, right? Almost all controllers plan at every tick that exists right now. This is exceptionally hard to do for the economy because you would need a one-to-one mapping between preferences and human preferences. And that's really, really hard because you do not know the outcome of these processes. So we're really good at doing things inside the machine when it comes to games, because the game has a complete model. Whatever you do in the abstraction of the game, it's what exists. So you can go forward in time, you can do whatever you want, right? And you can, it's only a problem of computation. If I mix a cake differently, or if I put different ingredients in the cake, I have no idea if this is still edible, right? I need to have a human to kind of test it and come back to me and tell me, is this an edible cake? So this is, imagine this is kind of, it creates the first big set of problems. That we do not have models of humans the same way we have them, or we cannot trust them. The second set of problems has to do with data. We lack the data, and I'm going to say more about it, but we do not have the recipes for most of the products that we are building, right? And no one has. We have some very high level, like governments at least, right? Keep some very high level statistics of some sectors, mostly in monetary terms, which I think is mostly useless for any form of commodity planning or fine-grained control. Furthermore, these things have no notion of time. There's nothing in there that will tell you that it takes you 3 months to build X or 3 months to build Y. There is, however, and they're starting to appear databases in the private sector where people have condensed, let's say, everything they could find in papers or public information, and they have created these tables. There's a database called OpenLCA, and LCA stands for Life Cycle Assessment. And these things come from the green community, right? The green community, yeah, the people that care a lot about externalities. What damage are you doing by creating a product, right? So they've put together a number of recipes. So if you look at these databases, they'll have something, in order to make a car, a Volkswagen I don't know, beetle from the 1970s, I would need that amount of metal, that amount of water, those days of labor, and they have it for a lot of different products. I have the links here, so if you want to go and play with the database, or you want to see tutorials about how you can use this, but this is the closest to an open data format of real usable data that I've ever came across. And if anyone knows of any more data repositories, I'll be more than happy to kind of to have a chat with them. Yeah, this is a big problem. In fact, quite a lot of the data in there are extrapolations. Right? So it's not clear what the quality of the data is. And if you look at other scientific fields, quality of the data is paramount, right? In order to extract useful conclusions. So if the quality of the data we have is not that great, then the conclusions you draw are very problematic. So, yeah. Now, let us say that somehow we managed to get those coefficients. So we've managed to get those recipes, right? It's really, really hard to do anything when it comes to control, because those recipes will never be really accurate, right? So though in the limit you might claim that you'll be able to get accurate recipes, simulations historically, even in very controlled environments, have been very hard to achieve to the quality that you're able to control. So basically, the robot that exists inside the machine is very different to the robot that exists in the real world, right? And the way people solve this is by simulating millions and millions of different parameters within the robot. They're called contexts, right? So they will simulate robots with different, let's say, robots with different friction, right? Different lengths, with the hope that this thing is generic enough that will transfer to the real world. This is like a process that requires supercomputers at the moment, right? It's really hard. And I think this is the prime reason as to why we're not seeing productivity gains from the robotics community. And we will not see any productivity gains from any planning that we'll attempt to do unless we take things like this into account. Factories where automation, we have a lot of automation, are man-made artifacts. Basically, the factory that exists inside a computer is the same factory that exists in the real world, more or less, right? And we can automate to our desire in those settings. But when it comes, but modern economies are not, factories are not in the West anymore, right? So, and a lot of what has not been automated inside factories involves things where human perception is needed. And we're not really good at doing this. So the very same problem you will face if you try to do a Leontief kind of self-programming. Now, another problem that again we know from AI is that control is not measurement. And this comes from something called the Goodhart's law. And Goodhart was one of Thatcher's economists, I think. And it goes something like that. When a measure becomes a target, it's just to be a good measure. So to give you an example, let's say you wanted to measure the quality of teaching by the number of students that get high grades, right? So you will assign to a teacher, you want to measure the quality of teaching. Is someone good or bad at teaching, right? And you go, the highest grades you give, the better you are, right? This is trivial to game and open to abuse, right? Because obviously there's a strong incentive for whoever is doing the teaching to give everyone an A. If you go to a factory and tell them, I need you to increase production, the measurement and what you're controlling are the same thing. I want you to increase production by 3,000 units. They will game it. It's the same, more or less the same problem as doing a wish spell, right? In D&D, or doing any kind of, talking to a genie or something, right? If there are, these are big logical systems. If there's a way to game it, people will game it. And this makes it really, quite often people kind of try to go, increase the number of production. It's as I said, it's not easy. Again, quite a few of these models assume linearity. So if it takes you, twice the time, if you need 500 grams of butter to make a cake, 2 grams of butter, you need 500 grams of butter to make 2 cakes, right? This is completely unrealistic. There are input-output models that help with this, but overall, this is an extremely unrealistic assumption. And the most common thing that people get taught in engineering is that, think pregnancy. You cannot give birth to a child by having two women, both of them trying to, having pregnancy for 4.5 months. So this is a kind of another problem. Now, preferences. You're going to build all this kind of, let's say we try to adopt the AI model and use it to kind of solve the Leontief system somehow, right? Well, you need to decide what are your targets. And what Leontief proposed is that those targets should be voted upon. Hence, if you like, the democratic part often in economic planning. So you would have people voting every so often for what they want to see, what they want to consume, right? I mean, it was never clear to me that preferences can be articulated. Like, it was never clear to me that people know what they want, right? Or they can express it in verbal terms. And that, for me, plays a big problem. So even, like, the quote you'll often hear about this is that had you asked people in the 16th century if they want a car, they would have told you we need a faster horse, something like this, right? So, yeah. And then there's the whole problem of desire, right? Okay, people don't know what they want, but who tells them what they want, right? The advertising plays a mighty role in there. Again, another set of problems that AI has, that you will invariably inherit if you try to kind of play with any of these systems, is something called catastrophic forgetting. I mean, humans forget, but machines forget catastrophically. What that kind of translates to is that if you try to teach a machine how to drive, after you have taught it how to cycle, it will forget how to cycle, right? You cannot teach machines things one after another. They need to be taught in a batch, right? And that's kind of killing things. Now, another topic that I kind of touched on the paper is alienation, right? We have all these bizarre mechanisms. I mean, let's say we kind of build this system and it's really, really good. And the question then becomes, who is making those cakes, right? And there's always this effort of creating democratic mechanisms of allocating who does the cake creation. But to me, and going back to Aristotle, it always looked like whoever is making those cakes will necessarily not be happy because they're doing labor, and labor is not fun, right? And for me, that's kind of very crucial. Even if you're able to design the system, if there are still people within the system that will have to toil, doesn't matter how you split it, they won't be happy, right? Or the happiness would be very kind of, I mean, it's really problematic for me, right? So if you take all of this into account, right, of like all the problems that we've seen, and in the paper I go far more detail about it, how far can we realistically go with a planner, right? And I would say you can design commodities, and I'm making a number of technical arguments in the paper, which I'm not going to go over them now, but you can create commodities that are basically used by every other commodity. So basic commodities, the immediate commodities, where you don't have to ask people about them, you just make them, right? So you can make machines more or less. You can make household machines. You can produce milk, water, all these kinds of things that are basically, they form the base of every other commodity. And then when it comes to the final product, they will be built in every household, right? So every household kind of controls part of their own production process. So that's in a way that kind of means that you're going to be receiving products in a half-made fashion, right? Products will not be complete. You will be receiving, so the state will be planning for material, not for commodities. Like, I think planning for commodities is impossible, basically, right? For final commodities. And capitalism will always pitch you. What you need to do is plan for intermediate materials that are more like Lego building blocks, and have people trained on technical topics, and they will have the capacity to put these building blocks together and create the final product. The same way you do with cooking. So to give you an example, I mean, you will have devices that will print something on a t-shirt, right? But you will be producing producing t-shirts of certain sizes is easy, right? Predicting the trends of t-shirts and how t-shirts are kind of modified is exceptionally hard. So what you can do is print those billions of t-shirts, like massive production lines of those t-shirts, right? In slightly various shapes, and get people being able to modify those t-shirts as they will. So get them this technical education alongside everything else that they have, right? And what you can do is in these t-shirt building factories then is you can literally turn them into lights out factories, because you're building commodities that do not change over time. You're building basic commodities. And you will also augment the household with machinery that would help people turn these intermediate commodities to final commodities. So again, you wouldn't have instant coffee, you would have coffee beans delivered, and then you would have all the machinery inside the house or the local produce that would change that to your individual taste and desires, right? You would never have the same final, the same product twice. So call this, I mean, this is equivalence of process. People would be taught how to make these things, their own households, but you'll never have the same, they'll never be able to produce the same t-shirt twice, more or less, right? Because it's not a automated factory process. So the overall idea here is that given what we know about AI, and if we transfer this to what we, to an automated planner, a fully automated planner down to commodities is impossible. Trends change all because of the problems I discussed. But you can go a step back. You can change the political economy and have people that can produce stuff, right? So you will have people that would have a much better capacity at building things, right? And I think this is where planning reverts by default. So if you look at Cuba, right, they're doing this, but I don't think they're doing it consciously. The thing that they're not building those intermediate machines consciously. They're building them because they cannot come up with commodities. So they don't really know what to do, I think at least, right? So they go towards, should we go towards the market? But they're building those intermediate machines. I mean, here's an invention to chop vegetables that someone made up with all. But the state does not actively promote that. The state does not actively build these intermediate quantities. The state, people find uses from old material, right? But the state doesn't actively, there's no active program of Lego building, if you like, right? We could definitely do better than this using bigger computers when it comes to planning, right? But I think the problems are fundamental. So the last part, which I have to rush through, right, is about the science of planning. So we don't have much when it comes to science. There are isolated communities that kind of discuss these topics. Someone needs to kind of bring us all together, create venues, journals, I don't know what, right, and kind of have a discussion about this. And we kind of need to go away from the idea of we will keep on running simulations or having hypotheses or high-level products. There are open databases. OpenLCA is one of them. We need to kind of make it more of a science, right? Or at least certain people within this community need to turn this more of a science. Go into the real databases, find more data, use your algorithm, see how far you can get, right? And yeah, so there was a field called artificial life, which it's still around, which I think has spent way too much time doing theory. And John Maynard Keynes, who's like a very famous biologist, called it fact-free science. You can do everything in the virtual. Like you can come up with any idea you want without data, right? I mean, you're basically doing fiction, right? So you need data, and quite often you need experimental data, right? Which is really hard to get. So how do we get data consumption? Or what data would we need? We need data what people consume. How often do consumer products need replacement? What are the timelines of consumption? How is consumption spread geographically? What other forces impact consumption and availability? Externalities of consumption. And whenever we build something, what else do we destroy? What kind of white goods should we be developing? What should go inside the household, right? We have very little of this. And data on production, supply chains. I mean, when businesses are trying to build commodities that do not include child labor, for example, they find that extremely hard because your supply chain is tainted by living instruments, right? So how do you get around it? I mean, who makes these commodities? But not in the abstract, not in a fictional universe, in this universe, right? I mean, how far do product travels? What labor goes into product? What is the level of labor education that's needed to develop a certain product? What happens with services that are basically production and consumption happening at the same time? How do you include this in the model, right? And then web scraping, right? I mean, web scraping, all these kinds of things. And I'm a very big proponent of setting up a kind of a serious scientific program in the tradition of this physical sciences, which means a lot of funding to capture all this and try to understand what's going on in this real world, not in the abstract, right? And then obviously benchmarks, so we can compare solutions. So if I come up and say, well, I've got this perfect planner, who's there to dispute me? No one, right? There is no common agreed upon benchmark. Everyone can say whatever they want, and at this point, it's way too much fiction for me, right? And the AI community tried to solve that by having standardized benchmarks. So you need to be able to beat poker. You need to be able to beat chess, right? Before I can trust your algorithm, that your algorithm will do something, right? I'd love to see the same kind of rigor in planning, right? And then experimental data. All the data described until now are observational data, right? They're data we've collected by observing others. And you cannot do causal inference, or it's really hard to do causal inference on observational data. And you know, the common example you give people is, what is the effect of smoking on life expectancy, right? And it's really hard to come up with a proper experiment to do it. There were all kinds of debates in the 50s. We had to go through observational data. We will need some kind of experimental data on societies before, and it's not even clear to me how we collect it. Now, in my last slide, which is basically fighting my previous slide, we've been really successful in the physical sciences over, let's say, the last 50, 60 years, because physical systems are small, confined, and you can experiment to death with them. It's not clear at all that societies are like that. In fact, I would claim that they're nothing like that. They're open systems. And you can think of a society, or if you try to abstract this, as you're trying to play a chess game, and then suddenly a new piece shows up, right? You cannot do modeling in the traditional setting that's so dynamic. And this form of uncertainty, I found it in the economics literature called Nathan uncertainty, right? So it's not the complexity of the problem. It's that you have a form of uncertainty and new types coming in continuously that kind of breaks your modeling premises all the time, right? And that makes things really hard. So I think kind of spot on. Concluding, no general instruments. So there are no general non-living instruments. There's nothing that I'm aware of that points to me that now or in the near future, we're going to have machines that can replicate humans. So the laws of value are safe, right? To my kind of understanding. Consumption and production need to be integrated at the household level, right? Right now, we don't have that in the West, right? And we don't have it because production is happening somewhere far away. And any system, any kind of movement that will come along, we need to have production going back to the household level. And we need to be producing more, right? So we need to go back to cooking, building, breathing, gardening, constructing, assembling. And the state should plan for ingredients and instruments, which is kind of ingredients as in the stuff that will help us build other things, and instruments, the machines that will gather all that stuff, all these ingredients, and help us build something else, right? The pots of the future. So the big problems are night and uncertainty. I'm not sure that the Leontief model is correct. I'm working on something right now based on multi-echelon inventories, but I think that's more of like, what kind of model would you prefer? I think the problems are much more fundamental and have to do with where we produce and how we do consumption. So that's it. Thank you. Any questions?